At 18, Clara Whitmore had imagined many possible futures for herself, none of which included being handed over like property to a widowed rancher, twice her age. Yet on the bleak winter morning, when her father clasped her wrist and guided her toward the wagon, she realized her wishes had long ago stopped mattering. The town of Briar Hollow knew her father as a man hardened by bad harvests and worse debts. And when the widowed rancher, Elias Grant, offered to settle those debts in exchange for Clara's hand, the decision had been made without her knowledge or consent. There was no white dress, no celebration, only the cold crunch of old snow beneath their boots, as her father avoided her eyes and muttered promises that this was for the best. Clara sat stiffly in the wagon, while Elias guided the horses, his face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat, his jaw strong yet softened by a persistent sadness. The townspeople whispered that the man was cursed, his wife having died suddenly 2 winters prior and leaving him with a ranch nearly too large for one man to maintain. Clara had expected cruelty or coldness from him, but instead she found silence, thick, patient, almost protective silence. When they arrived at the ranch, she braced herself for commands and rules, but Elias simply led her inside, lit the hearth, and set a steaming cup of tea in front of her as though she were an honored guest. "You're safe here," he said quietly, and though she didn't yet believe him, the words lingered in her mind like the last warm ember on a dying fire. Days passed, and Clara worked side by side with him, learning the rhythms of the ranch, feeding the horses at dawn, gathering firewood, tending to the quiet corners of a home that still whispered the presence of another woman. At night, she heard Elias stepping softly, careful never to intrude on her space. He was gentle with the animals, and even gentler with her, speaking only when she seemed ready to talk. The townspeople, however, spun their own stories. They said Clara had been sold. They said Elias was desperate. They said she would run away before spring. But Clara discovered something different. She discovered the rancher was a man who carried guilt, heavier than any saddle. Guilt for not saving his wife when illness struck. Guilt for being unable to bury the loneliness that seeped into his bones. Clara's presence unsettled him, because he didn't know how to deserve kindness anymore. One night, after a snowstorm sealed the doors and the wind howled like wolves across the plains, Clara caught Elias staring into the flames, his face shadowed by memories that refused to let go. She approached slowly and handed him the quilt she had mended earlier. His eyes flicked to hers, soft, tired, grateful. For the first time, she saw the truth in them. This man had not taken her to replace his late wife. He had taken her to save her. Word had spread in town that Clara's father had been planning to send her to a distant settlement where girls were treated far worse than cattle. Elias, hearing the whispers, had stepped in because he couldn't bear to watch another innocent soul disappear into despair. Clara's breath caught as she realized that the life she thought she had been forced into might be the first place she had ever truly been safe. Over the following weeks, they developed an unspoken rhythm. He taught her how to ride properly, how to mend fences, how to read the sky for weather changes. She taught him how to laugh again. Slowly, the cold walls between them thawed. One morning, while gathering water near the corral, Clara overheard 2 townsmen riding by. "She won't last," one of them sneered. "That girl's too soft. Elias'll break her spirit." Clara lifted her chin, a spark igniting within her. They didn't know Elias. They didn't know her. What shocked the town was not that she had been given away, but that she was growing stronger, braver, and more radiant under the widowed rancher's protection. The whispers continued, but Clara paid them no mind. What mattered was the quiet home they were building, slowly, piece by piece. But the calm wouldn't last. Spring approached, and with it came the return of someone from Elias's past, someone determined to tear apart the fragile bond Clara and Elias had begun to form. And when the truth came out, it would shake Briar Hollow to its core. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The first sign of trouble came with the sound of hooves. ripping across the thawing earth, sharp and urgent like a warning shot in the distance. Clara was hanging linens to dry when she saw the rider, a tall, broad man with a scar running down one cheek, his coat too fine for a ranch hand, and his expression far too hungry for peace. His arrival put the horses on edge, their ears twitching, their bodies tense. Elias emerged from the barn the moment he heard the commotion, his posture stiffening as if facing a ghost. Clara watched as the stranger dismounted and strode toward. Elias with a confidence that felt like a blade pressed too close to the skin. "You thought I wouldn't come back," the stranger said, and Clara sensed the danger coiled beneath each word. His name was Barrett Cole, once Elias's closest friend, and now the embodiment of everything Elias had. Spent years trying to escape. Rumors in town whispered that Barrett was part of the darker business that sometimes surrounded Frontier. Life, debt, smuggling, and whispered threats. Clara's fingers curled around the linen she held as she saw the haunted look in Elias's eyes, a look she had never seen before. Barrett had come to reclaim something he believed belonged to him. And when his gaze slid to Clara, slow and calculating, her stomach twisted. "So this is the girl you traded half your land for?" Barrett mocked. Elias stepped between them instantly, his voice low but unshaking as he warned Barrett that Clara was under his protection. Clara's heart hammered as Barrett smirked, amused rather than intimidated. He spoke of old agreements, of secrets Elias had never shared, of a night long ago when Elias had chosen to leave their partnership, choosing love, choosing goodness, choosing a life free from the shadows Barrett embraced. Clara listened in frozen silence as Barrett claimed Elias still owed him, that Clara's father had taken money from Barrett as well, that Clara herself was now the payment Barrett intended to collect if Elias couldn't repay what was due. The truth was a storm breaking open inside her. She felt betrayed not by Elias, but by the world that had tossed her around like a pawn. Elias, however, did not hesitate. He stepped closer to Barrett and declared that he would never allow Clara to be dragged into darkness. Barrett laughed, but the laughter died when Elias told him he was prepared to forfeit everything: land, livestock, every last coin, if it meant Clara remained free. Clara felt her throat tighten. She had been told her entire life that she was nothing but a burden, an item to trade, a silent shadow expected to obey. But here was a man willing to sacrifice everything he had built to protect her dignity. Barrett, seeing Elias's resolve, shifted tactics. His voice turned colder as he threatened the ranch, the animals, the house, and anyone who got in his way. He promised to return in 3 days for an answer and rode off, leaving dust and dread in his wake. Clara and Elias stood in silence long after he vanished. That night the ranch felt different, quieter, heavier. Clara confronted Elias, her voice trembling as she begged him not to sacrifice his home for her. Elias told her gently that a home built on fear wasn't worth keeping. He confessed how he had once been part of Barrett's dealings, but had run from that life because his wife, God rest her soul, had begged him to become the man she believed he could be. Losing her had nearly destroyed him, but meeting Clara had reminded him that goodness was still possible. Clara felt tears gather as she realized just how much he carried inside him. When she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. The next 3 days were spent preparing, not for surrender, but for battle. Clara and Elias formed alliances with ranchers who respected Elias, men and women who had long despised Barrett's influence. Word spread quickly through town that a reckoning was coming. On the 3rd morning, Barrett returned, expecting submission. Instead, he found Elias standing firm with Clara at his side, and a dozen ranchers waiting behind them, armed with rifles and conviction. Barrett sneered, calling them fools, but the ranchers didn't flinch. Clara stepped forward then, her voice steady as she declared that she belonged to no man, not her father, not Barrett, not even Elias. She was choosing her own life now, and she chose to stand with Elias not because she was forced to, but because she believed in him. Barrett's bravado cracked when he saw the resolve she carried. The standoff ended not with bullets, but with humiliation. Barrett fled, vowing revenge, but the townspeople later drove him out of Briar Hollow entirely. For the first time, Clara felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The town that had pitied her was now in awe. Elias, humbled and shaken, asked her what she wanted for her future. Clara looked around at the ranch she had mended, the horses she had tamed, the man who had protected her fiercely yet gently, and she realized she had found not captivity, but purpose. She chose to stay, not as a debt, not as an obligation, but as a partner in rebuilding a life. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting gold across the fields, the townspeople whispered their final shock. The girl who had been given away had become the strongest woman Briar Hollow had ever seen. If you want more stories like this, filled with emotion, twists, and powerful messages, make sure to subscribe to the channel and never miss an update.